Today we are beginning really the heart of our work. We're starting the deliberations about what recommendations we will be presenting. As you know, the commission was tasked with reviewing street names and monuments that were related to the Confederacy and the legacy of Jim Crow. And essentially, how does the city begin to think about changing the symbolic landscape to more align with the values of 21st century Charlotte? We've heard superb presentations from Dr. Cox and Dr. Griffin. We've learned about what other peer cities have done around this, and we have been given a list of street names to consider. As we had discussed last time, we had some hope that we could do this in person, but the pandemic prevents us from meeting inside, and unfortunately, a park pavilion is not possible because the city requires that meetings be recorded. Therefore, the deliberations will have to be virtual, and candidly, that is a lot more challenging. So I really ask all of you to step up, all of us to step up, and try to be as fully present as we can be to participate fully. And one thing, especially in these discussions, is to keep your video on. It's really hard to talk to blank screens, and especially when we're doing back and forth. So when we come to the points where we're to the point in the meetings where we're discussing, I really please turn your video on. The functionality, as you will see in a few minutes, is really clunky. So please be patient and understanding that it's a lot less organic and fluid than it would be if we were meeting in person. I really believe strongly from past work in other commissions and work at Levine Museum that we make sounder decisions when everyone's voice is heard. So I really urge everyone to participate fully. I also believe strongly that sounder decisions are arrived at if you engage in an iterative process. And by that, I mean that you make a preliminary decision, review it, and then review it again to the extent possible. And that's what we will be doing. In a few minutes, we'll start making a first pass at street names to be changed, but we will review that again at our next meeting on, I believe it's the 21st, and then again at the 28th. And then those draft recommendations will go out for public comment, and our hope is to reconvene on Wednesday, December the 2nd, to see what the community had to say, and then finalize our recommendations for the mayor and city council, possibly at the December, is it 7th? Let me see. I've got to look at my notes.
Yes, Monday, December 7th.
Monday, December 7th, City Council meeting. So let's see. Does anyone, excuse me, have any questions about that sort of calendar or that process? If not, then we will move on to the work at hand. And as we discussed last time, and many of you voiced this very passionately and in a compelling way, that it's really going to be important that this commission speak with one voice, that we have collective agreement as we take these recommendations first out to the community and then to the city council, and that we really need to have clear criteria that we can make a compelling case for why we're recommending these changes, that it's not just our personal opinions. So the first task at hand this morning is to take a look at possible criteria that we will use when we weigh whether or not we're going to recommend changing certain street names. And I want to thank each of you. I mean, the pairs did amazing work. You were incredibly thoughtful and thorough. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at everyone's feedback that Tiffany sent out yesterday. What Tiffany and I did is read through those, and we came up with our sort of distillation of what we read and heard from you. And Tiffany is now going to put up sort of a summary sheet. And Tiffany, once that's up.
One second, let me switch back over. Can everyone see that?
I can see the top half of it.
So it's either I'd have to make to get it all on one page. The font's going to go
small.
Down.
Okay, can you put it to? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine actually. So in reading through the feedback from the 5 groups, there was general agreement across all the groups for the 2 criteria below. And it was expressed that priority should be placed on streets named for Confederate leaders and officers and individuals who actively fought against equality. So I ask you just now to take a minute or two and read down through that part. There was not a general before there was not a general consensus. Tiffany, can you take it down for just a second so I can see people? And then we'll go back to the bottom half in a minute. What I would like to ask is there agreement that everyone agrees that those are 2 criteria for sure that we're all comfortable with? I think the easiest way is maybe a thumbs up or thumbs down or a maybe. So members of the commission, thumbs up. Okay, I think I see all thumbs up.
All thumbs up.
Okay. Now, Tiffany, there was also very strong support that we have solid documentation for all the recommendations, that we in fact knew that a street had been named for a certain person, and that there was a need for community engagement and public input. So those are process pieces, but there was also that ran across all 3. Where there was not a general consensus was about street names tied to slavery and slave owners. And I think that we need to take the next few minutes and have a discussion to reach some sort of consensus about, is there going to be a 3rd criteria or not, or are we only going to use the first 2? So what I would like you to do is now read what we pulled out is 4 different views that sort of range on a spectrum of how people felt about street names associated with slave owners. So just take a couple minutes, please, and read these. Has everyone had a chance to read over the? Tiffany, I think probably the easiest thing for us to have a discussion is to take it down now. Or do people need, I can't see people if that's up, but does everyone have the general range of views and opinions? Okay.
And would it be advantageous for me to email that to the group right quick? I could do that if everyone wants it, just to have it quick. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me do that really quickly.
That's a great idea. Hence the clunkiness. I'm so sorry. This is so, if we were all together, it would be so easy, but, or easier. I mean, it's just, anyway, yeah, that's a great idea. Okay. Reactions, responses.
I'll start off. I think that I had two issues with this, and I would say that the first was the names Brevard, Evans, and others, is that if there was an understanding they were named after an individual and not a family, and I guess I was thinking along the lines that every family has individuals that perhaps are not appreciated as much to do other things that would not be appreciated, but do we want to stigmatize the entire family or even their descendants in a particular way? And I guess I was concerned with knowing that the street was named after someone or as opposed to a family. And also, I think that the ones in regards to Dixie, and you could throw other words in there, Southern, et cetera, that the volume was so great that I felt like it would actually hurt the overall perspective of what our organization was doing. It was almost as though we're reaching out to terms that may be relative and in some way, again, take away from our overall mission.
Thank you, Mike. Other thoughts, other views?
This is Lynn. I guess in the letter that we all got originally talking about this, there was a mention that I think it says engaging in a study of street names and monuments in the city that honor a legacy of Confederate soldiers, slave owners, and segregationists. So I think it is expected that we address this, and I don't know. It is hard when you start looking at the fact that it's going to end up, even just looking at slave owners, it's going to result in having to potentially change a number of streets, and I don't know if the difference between whether it was named for a family or a particular individual who happened to be a slave owner. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe it does make a difference, but I do think we have to be thinking about, especially I know a lot of these streets are legacy streets, let's call them. They go way back, but I think we have to think about, particularly in the uptown area, which is almost like an area that belongs to everyone. I think we're going to have to think hard about, should we change these street names to honor someone else? The other thing about and Fanny and I put our thing in about, you see it in there about the other names, and we that's a hard one because I agree, you don't want to change every name. And actually that was just for consideration. I think, plantation, I know has become a very controversial word. And I guess I'm trying to decide, do we address these things now, Dixie, things that truly are connected. I don't think Southern's connected to the Confederacy. I think that Dixie's definitely connected to the Confederacy. And I think plantation has a certain, I think it actually goes beyond romanticizing the South. I think it was a kind of it's a painful institution or a painful place, to be. And I kind of want to really consider these now, because I would hate for us to do this and have to come back in a few years when people start raising this issue again. So maybe we can come up with good reasons, either that we need to do it or we don't need to do it in terms of changing I'll call them place names versus people names.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. It's an interesting distinction, the place names versus people names. Others' thoughts?
I'm curious whether we have any information about what the average cost is to people who live on a street when the name gets changed. Because, if it's a business, it's going to be more onerous than if it's a short street with 3 people living on it. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if a piece of our rubric or whatever we come up with, it needs to have a piece of it that talks about the burden on people whose street name is getting changed.
A good point. Does anyone from Lena or Tiffany have information on that?
This is Lena. I don't, in terms of cost, so I don't know if that's something we can try to gather and get some information on. Tiffany, maybe we can check with our folks at the department and the writer be able to give us some information, at least possibly on the front and when strictly change, but offhand I don't know.
Yeah, I've added that as a flag that for a follow-up with planning, so I'll add that to the list.
Well, I know there have been street names changed in the last 15 or 20 years, and just the experience of that would be helpful. So, 2nd Street became Martin Luther King Boulevard, which I'm guessing nobody objected to, but you never know. And I know there's various streets out there that I think have changed names. So CDOT or whoever waves their magic wand and makes that happen may have some experience. I mentioned that just to say that, given that I think we all suspect that some of these recommendations are going to be controversial, I think knowing that we've weighed what we know about the burden on property owners would be helpful to our public presentation.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Mary, there actually was a discussion several years back when Jim Richardson passed away about naming a road in his honor. And I remember the discussion was around people pushing back, saying that there was some cost involved. So maybe that could be used as a reference point or where that information might come from.
Others?
Yes, this is Fanny. The whole idea of looking at whether or not we would consider changing names named after slave owners is a little tricky. There's a lot of, you have to look at the history of who owned slaves, and there are a lot of different people who owned slaves, and some of them owned them to protect them, and a lot of different reasons. But I wonder, I don't know whether whether we're saying that we are going to recommend that we just have a blanket policy or recommend something that's blanket that says that we don't consider renaming streets that are named after slave owners, because there may be some people who own slaves who we would want to consider renaming the street from. So I'm not sure whether if we're going to make a recommendation on this, whether the recommendation should be one that just says that we recommend that streets that are named after slave owners don't be changed. I wouldn't think that should be a recommendation. Make a nuance to that. Obviously, the people who were Confederates would have owned slaves, some of them.
Right.
So, So I think we need to, if we're going to look at that particular situation, we need to be a little bit more nuanced about how we frame it, because there are, I mean, and there would probably be some known slave owners who were known to be very vicious and violent, and there may be some documentation on that, who we would say those streets need to be renamed. So I'm just a little leery of us having any policy or recommendation that says we recommend that you don't rename streets that were named slave owners. And I don't know whether that's what we were saying, but just looking at those four outline pieces there, just a little concerned that that our recommendation would go in that direction. So just wanted to put that out there.
This is Lynn. And Fanny, I agree with you. I think we need an exception, and I think it was mentioned in some of the comments made here, where it would be, you mentioned one thing about, you know, it's really an individual thing. You have to look at each person. But for example, we have streets named after founding fathers and Ben Franklin, who owned slaves, at least at one point in their lives. But they made, you know, fairly extraordinary contributions, you know, to the country. And as Dr. Griffin pointed out, you know, all men are created equal, although at the time it was only applying to wealthy white men. It became the basis upon which our country evolved and has gotten us, not totally perfect yet, but getting us a lot closer. So, you know, there are exceptions I see like that, and there may be others we make. So I think we just have to look at them each individually. I don't know how to put that into words, except to, you know, originally we had extraordinary contributions to the community, state, or country. Maybe other things too.
Karen, Dr. Cox?
Yeah, I want to just add to the conversation about these distinctions, certainly around the issue of founding fathers, where monuments are concerned. I think you could translate this into street names, is that the distinction is between what, you know, that the reason of the honor of a monument, or perhaps of the naming of a street, had to do with these broader contributions to American democracy, not based on in a way that Confederate soldiers or Confederate officers are not. They fought in a war to preserve slavery. And so those, even among historians, there are distinctions made between those people who make contributions and who are honored for their broader contributions in the United States, but we could say here in the community, as opposed to honoring them for having been engaged in slavery or in a war that perpetuates slavery. So there are those distinctions, and it could be that you make those distinctions among, you know, who got named, you know, why were they named, these certain streets named, or they named for, and when we know that they had, you know, that slavery is part of the reason that some of these people, their names are coming into question. And I agree, unless, you know, the commission suggests that, you know, every single one of these people get investigated for how vicious or not, you know, of a slave, that would be almost impossible to do and get this done. So I think I just would just, building off of what Lynn had said, that, you know, there are those distinctions that you can make around people and their contributions to the community.
Other comments? Donnie, Levester, Kristen?
Yeah, I think if we're looking at the views and the criteria we came up with, I think view 3 is really interesting if we were able to define it more. I think by that criteria, it's open to a lot of interpretation. But if we were able to kind of combine view 3 and view 1, I think that would, to me, cover most of the streets that from my interpretation has been our consensus as a group.
Thank you, Kristen.
Emily, hey, this is Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the distinction that Dr. Cox made, I think, is very important about historical figures of the Revolutionary War or up into the early part of the 19th century were much different than those that fought to maintain the institution of slavery and slavery in the South. And fought the war for it. So I think that is a very important distinction, and I think that's a distinction that our community would be able to recognize, as opposed to reaching back to the time of the Revolutionary War before, and not diminishing the abhorrence of it all, but I think that that's probably more difficult for the community writ large to sort of understand, given the work that we've been charged with doing. And I think with respect to Kristen, I think that the comments or the recommendation in view 1 that romanticize sort of the Old South or the plantation era or slave era, I think that's really view 3 is what Deborah and I sort of proffered up. And I think that's the kind of thing that we were also going for, I think it was Len that said, the connotation of these kinds of names, sanitize and glorify something that should not be sanitized nor held up, right? It was deplorable. And so I think that's really what we were intending. So I think finding some way to clarify that and make distinctions around it, I think would be helpful. So we're supportive of that.
Thank you, Alan. Any other comments? In my reading, one distinction that I have read that I know a number of colleges have made. I know UNC Chapel Hill, their historical commission looking at names of buildings in particular, because just as this states about street names, so many, whole host of buildings were named for slave owners. And, they discussed, were the people simply men of their times, or were they actual advocates and champions? And very clearly there were any number of people both at Chapel Hill and also I know Duke, and doing their deliberations similarly, chose, people that were active advocates and that word champion. And by definition, any leader of the Confederacy was a champion of slavery. So I think that's why that one was so easy for us in coming up with that one. The Queens College changed Burwell Hall because it was known that Mr. Burwell was a slave owner, but they did research, and in fact he was incredibly cruel, and there was an account by an enslaved woman who escaped and went north and wrote an account about his cruelty. So I don't know. I think that the inclusion of the Confederate connections clearly states that those people were advocates and champions of slavery. And, as Fanny, I think you pointed out, it's really tough. Slavery was morally abhorrent, but, as many people have said, the challenge of including anyone who was a slave owner in changing those names is tough. So, any other comments on this? Levester, were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I've been having some connectivity problems, but I've been monitoring by audio.
Would you like to add to the conversation?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
No, I'm fine. I apologize. I've been having some connectivity problems. Too many. We got several people working in my house at home, so maybe that's the issue. But I'm in sync with what everyone is saying. Tom and I've had 2 excellent meetings, and I appreciate his support. And basically, I think we indicated that to go with the street names after Confederate generals, that might be best to do, but just be very mindful of the fact that we can't save all the names. And I personally don't think that everyone should be excluded because of basically what you might say, sins of their generations going 3 or 4 generations back. We have to be sensitive and have a little empathy about other people and their ancestors too. So other than that, I agree with everything that's being said.
Okay. Thank you for adding that.
I would just, if I could add one thing, I agree wholeheartedly, particularly with what Dr. Cox has said, the way that we framed this, and Fanny as well. Charlotte not being an old sort of slave center, even though we had slavery, and I made that very clear in my presentation, we did not have the presence of folks who were a part of the pro-slavery advocates as a political party. We didn't have folks like Andrew Jackson or James C. with John Calhoun. I think those are the people who were noted advocates for pro-slavery and advancing it, and were known to be cruel slave owners themselves. But the street names that we have here in Charlotte that are named after slave owners were not particularly popular throughout the country, or known for owning large amounts of slave or even advocating for it in public.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Thanks for that clarification. Well, 2 questions arise for me before we actually turn to the names. I mean, one is there a sense that we only now want to keep the 2 criteria that all groups agreed to and then begin the process? So that's one question. The second question is there any desire to split the actual names of people from those names that are sort of the ones that perhaps glorify an Old South ethos, like Planter, Gone with the Wind themes, or any of that? I mean, it seems to me those are the 2 questions, and I'm not exactly sure which order. Let me ask the second one first. Is there any sense that we should divide streets named for people from names just tied to the notion of the antebellum South? I mean, there doesn't seem to be unanimity on that either, but I'm just asking, are those the same or different for people?
And Emily, to clarify, we're talking about like Dixie and antebellum. That's part of
plantation wood, cotton planter, yeah. And as I said, if we don't have any kind of consensus on this, we can begin with the names and then see which ones the group says should be changed. So I don't want to belabor this point, but do people feel a distinction between those 2 at this point, or would you just prefer to go ahead to the names and let's see what percolates to the change?
This is Lynn. I think there is a distinction. I think it'd be. I think on the names we're going to have it'll be easier to come to consensus, and on the second it may be maybe easy too, I don't know. But I think it would be good to split them because we probably know, I think we probably have a general, probably more general agreement on the names than on the idea of the places. So that'd be my recommendation, go with the names first.
Yeah, I agree with Len. I think from a practical or managing the conversation perspective, I think they are two different kinds of conversations.
Okay.
I agree as well. And also just speaking of some of the names that were not on our list but have come up, a lot of those are in an area called Providence Plantation. I mean, just from looking at it from the folks who live there, you could end up changing every name in their neighborhood. And I just wonder how much of a pushback you're going to get. It's one thing to say this road here, but every road in your neighborhood is changing. I just don't know about the stigma it would put on that neighborhood. And again, just the liability or the amount of change in one particular area. That just seems like we're going to get a tremendous amount of pushback on that. And I'm looking from a political perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, one, we are going to make, I think, as we've discussed, some general recommendations as well as specific. And I believe, Tiffany, you had said somebody that's building, I think it's Crescent Resources, who's working on that new river community or whatever it's called, has put in a request to change some Dixie Drive of some sort. So it may be that while we don't make a specific change, we may say, we could make some sort of general recommendation that as the city is developed, that communities may want to consider or businesses may want to consider those names without the specifics. I mean, I think I'm not trying to dodge it, but I think that there is a way to make a recommendation without listing each one of them.
And I'll also add, Emily, there's a difference, I think, from established to new development. So there might be a way for you to offer recommendations that way from something that's an established neighborhood, and then the river district is new, right? So there's an opportunity to kind of rebrand in a new area versus something that's already established.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any other comments about this? I mean, I think that the one thing we are all agreed on as we look at the street names that Dr. Griffin gave us to consider, that we are definitely using the two criteria of Confederate leadership and those associated with white supremacy. And then I think that perhaps the best way to proceed at this point, I really appreciate people's comments in this discussion, is to go ahead and do the voting and see what percolates to the surface. Are people comfortable with that? Give me a thumbs up if you are, or if you think we need to deliberate more on this point about the consideration of names associated with slaveholders, or do we want to move on to actually looking at specific names? Thumbs up if you want to move on to looking at specific names.
Might you talk just a little bit more about how we will consider those names? Because and all of us are finding this really tough to, put boundaries and criteria.
What we are about to
sense of where we're going will help me. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I'm sorry. I know this is challenging. What we're about to do is each of us that are commission members using the two criteria that we all agree on, plus whatever our personal understanding is of the issue of the ones that are not necessarily tied to the Confederacy or white supremacy, but just slave owners, that we are going to take the entire list that Dr. Griffin gave us. And Tiffany's going to put up on the screen in a minute, all of them. And collectively, we're going to do a first pass, say, in our opinion, and you'll do this by on your own, and then she will be able to compile it at the end. Each street name, yes change, no change, or unsure. yes, I mean, in your opinion, yes, change that name, no, don't change it, or unsure. And then at the end, at that point, we will see what we have. Does that, but the idea is that we will use the two criteria that everyone agrees on, and then personal views on the others. I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, it may all sift out that people collectively don't feel we should deal with certain names. Does that make sense, Tom?
So this is the first pass through. This is not a final thing by any means.
No, that was what I was saying about iterations. This is a first pass. We will revisit it next time. We will revisit it at the end of the month, and then at the end of the month, we have to have an agreement about what we want to put out for public comment. Is that clear?
That's getting there. That's good.
Okay. So is any other questions, or so taking a look at this list and using the criteria that we've established, you're going to vote on each one. Yes, definitely change. No, don't change, or you're unsure. And then we will take a look with what the collective group thinks. So Tiffany, are you ready to put it up?
Yeah, just a couple notes. I'll put as I'm pulling up the poll now. Unsure could also mean you need more information or more research on a specific area, and that's something that we can definitely partner with Dr. Griffin on. So if there's unsure, could also be you don't feel like you have adequate information, right, to make the decision at this point. So that hopefully we can begin to work on that. I'm going to pull up the poll now. It says 15 minutes. Hopefully everyone sees it in kind of the bottom right. There's 29 street names based off of the list that we've been working from Dr. Griffin. And you can answer each one as you scroll down. If we need more time or less time, I can adjust that. So just, I think 15 minutes should be sufficient.
Yeah, and obviously the easiest way, if you're unsure of all these people, is, pull out the list that, Dr. Griffin gave us and, see if in your mind they fit the criteria.
And I've emailed that criteria to everyone, so everyone has that PDF if you need to reference that in your email.
Yeah, and Tiffany, I appreciate that because I think that the first two are, and I haven't looked at the list yet, Charles Aycock and also Harriet Clarkson. If anyone's read Tom Hanchek's book and also Bittersweet Legacy, they were very involved in segregation movements in the late 19th and 20th century. But the word that bothers me on that is most likely. So I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we want to be very definitive, but we just want to get a pulse if we can.
Okay, and where is that located at, by the way?
Do you see it in the bottom right? In the bottom right kind of poll, do you see it?
Does everyone see the poll?
I can see the poll, but I don't have easy access to the master list. And some of these things I know why they're on the list, but others I simply don't remember.
Sure, I will email that out right now.
That would be really helpful. I know I have it somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
No worries. That's a good point for me. Sorry about that. I'll email that to the group right now.
And just confirming the yes is yes, we should rename the streets.
Correct. Yes, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
I don't see the poll.
Okay.
I still see everybody's faces.
Let me see. I'm a novice, so let me see if I can figure that out.
Okay.
Does anyone else not see the poll?
I had to click into it from the participants window on the right.
Do you see your participants window on your right, Lynn?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Polling. Okay. Let me try that. Well, polling. There's something called polling. Okay. Yeah, I've got it. Okay. I got it.
And I just sent everybody that list with the street name, so it'll be at the top of your inbox.
I'm having a problem getting from the first two to respond to the third, and
Do you have a scroll? Do you have an option to scroll on your right?
I'll look and see.
Tiffany, if I could just interject something about the Clarkson Street, the number 2 option. Tom and I have been going back and forth for the past 2 weeks about actual origins of Clarkson Street. And the earliest documentation that we have in the city of Clarkson actually being named or street name is from 1881, I believe. And that appeared in the Charlotte newspaper. And if that is in fact, Harriet Clarkson would have only been 20 years old at the time. And so the things that we've been able to find out is that if Clarkson is named after that family name, it would not have been named after Harriet. It would have been named after either his father or his uncle. His uncle tried to revive the Charlotte Military Academy in the 1870s after it had faltered. And his father was a prominent railroad man in the city, but all of them came from a very large Clarkson family that had a large plantation on the outside of Columbia. So it's clear that Clarkson is probably not named after Harriet. It's probably named after either his uncle or father.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
So you're saying Willie, I'm sorry, I wasn't following. So it was likely not named for Harriet?
Yes, it was likely not named for Harriet because he would not have accomplished much as a 20-year-old. I think he would have just been graduating from UNC and returning to Charlotte to start a law firm.
Okay.
So it would be named after a person who owned slaves, but not Harriet. Not a person who advocated for white supremacy.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question about number 12, which is called Audrey. And the list that Dr. Griffin gave us is Ardrey, like Ardrey Kell. Is that just a typo when we're talking about Ardrey?
That's probably just a typo for me trying to get them in as quickly as possible. I apologize. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just want to make sure that I was making the right assumption.
You're totally right.
Okay.
I tried to match the numbers, so yeah, that's my bad.
Guys, also on the last one, Behringer, I'm not able to submit an answer on that one. I'm not sure if everyone's having that issue or not.
Let me know if anyone else is having that issue. If not, I can just manually update your response.
Which number is that? Which number is there?
29. That's number 29.
Oh, I haven't gotten that far. I'm sorry.
I have a question about Stone Mountain Court. And wonder if it's been established that it was named after Stone Mountain, Georgia, as opposed to the Stone Mountain in North Carolina, which has a state park named for it. That's number 28.
I hear your question and ill-equipped to answer.
Yeah, when I included Stone Mountain on the list, I was thinking of Stone Mountain, Georgia, that has become synonymous with the largest Confederate monument in the country. Was not really aware that there was a Stone Mountain, North Carolina State Park. So, yeah, I would be unsure.
I'll put unsure there. Oh, now I can't click on them. It's frozen me out.
Okay. And it doesn't let you scroll or submit.
In terms of the Stone Mountain thing, again, this is where it's really hard to pin stuff down. If you look it up on the map, it's in a development where there is also Rumstone Lane, Wingstone Lane, Chimney Rock Court, and Stagestone Court, and Balancing Rock Court. So there's some indication that it might not be named after the place in Georgia. But really hard to know.
So what do we do if it won't let us submit or won't log in any new answers?
Will you just jot them like on a scratch sheet of paper?
Yeah.
And then I can just, this is our first pass, so we'll just figure it out. It looks like I have 3 people who are able to submit.
Okay.
9 in progress. Okay. So it looks like we're just coming up to 3 minutes. And let's just get as far as you can, and then we can go from there. just over a minute for those last few responses, if you can. Looks to be about 20 seconds. Just got yours, Mary. Thank you. Okay. So it's tallying it out now. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to share this again.
Tiffany is saying 10 out of 15. How many people are actually, commission members are actually on the call today? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Let's see.
Can everyone see the poll results? Are you able to see them on the side? Oh, okay, okay. Thank you for your patience. I'm just figuring this out. Okay. I'm sorry, Emily, you asked me a question. I was trying to pull them up. I'm sorry.
No, the responses are out of 15, but on the call today, there are 10 of us, I believe. Is that right? 1, 2,
Plus
3,
Karen and Willie, I believe.
Yeah, but they're not voting members. So it's only there. So 10 is the maximum that any today's vote could be, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah.
I didn't complete the poll, so it's not.
No, exactly.
Yeah, right.
I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm getting 12. So not everyone's, well, okay.
I can pull up the individual. Hold on, it'll take me a little.
No, I'm just trying to figure out how many, the maximum it could be with how many people are here today. There, two members of the commission aren't participating, and one is unable to be here today. So I think I'm trying to figure out. I think there are 11 people, 11 commission members on.
I have responses from, I don't know who user is. Are you user? You might be user.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So I have responses from you, Lynn, Fanny, Alan, Mary, Kristen, Mike, Donnie, Tom, Levester, and B.
Okay, and that adds up to how many? That's what.
That was 10.
10. Okay, so
11.
anything that got a 10 is unanimous.
Correct.
Okay. So, Aycock is a unanimous. Clarkson is sort of a mix of yes and unsure. Morrison is a unanimous. Vance is almost unanimous. Bragg is unanimous. Moorhead is divided. Stonewall is unanimous. Jefferson Davis is let's see. Hill is a Confederate. Myers. It's unsure. Andre. I'm just scrolling through this trying to get a sense. We will compile this and send it out to everyone.
It looks as if 11 people rather than 10 are responding to the poll. I don't think it changes the results much, but I think it's 11 rather than 10 for some reason.
You are correct, Tom. I just went back and recounted. Sorry, that's why I was quiet. But I do have 11 people. I have Emily, Lynn, Fanny, Alan, Mary, Kristen, Mike, Donnie, Tom, Levester, and B, which is 11. But not everyone answered got to every single question. So this is our first time. I think we're doing good for the first time. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back.
I somehow another lost. Let me see if I can get back in. Okay.
Can you see it now?
Now, yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
I apparently had. Okay. So I'm getting an echo. Can people hear me? I think that Tiffany, what we should do is compile the list in the various categories. And you won't be able to do that now in real time.
That's correct. Yeah, I can do that.
Do the historians have any observations from what the results they've seen?
Emily, I'm getting a lot of feedback on your end. It looks like you're there twice for some reason. In the WebEx twice.
Well, I click, let me see. I'm going to leave the meeting.
Yep, there you go. You're good now. The other one's gone.
I'm good, but I can't see you.
Oh, my video's off, so y'all could, so I could work on the other stuff behind the scenes. But can you see other people?
I can't see anybody. Let me see.
Oh.
That's why I joined again, but all right, that's echoing again. Well, I'll just get off and go back all the way. I'll get off of everything and come back.
Okay.
All right. Is this still echoing? Shoot.
Yes.
All right. I'll get. Mm-hmm.
Or do you just want to call in? You can mute yourself and then just call in. So there, the echo went away, but I guess with that view, you can't see everyone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you very well.
And is it not echoing?
Not echoing.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, I got on twice. All right. I think what the best thing to do is for you to after the meeting, compile these in the categories and then send it out this afternoon for everyone to review. I was curious as to whether the historians who scanning it have any observations. My quick scroll down, which I'm sorry I was talking to think, I mean, it seems as if there is a unanimity on Confederate leaders and the white supremacists, or the ones that are known. And the rest of it seems murky that reflects our discussion. I mean, that's my quick first pass. Do the others have observations?
I would agree with you, your observation as well.
This is Mary. I wonder, as we get into further discussions, especially on the unsure ones, I meant several different things when I clicked unsure. Some of them I meant I'd like to know more research. And others, I mean, like the Dixie one especially, I wanted to know more about what's the difficulty for all of the different Dixie residents in all these different places. Because I personally would like to balance out the onerousness of the name change versus the, how strong is the need to change the name. And if it were just one short Dixie Street, I'd be absolutely change it. But there's a whole bunch of them. And I like Dixie River Road is a real historic name. So I was unsure about that, not for needing more research on history, but needing more research on how many are really out there and, how many people and businesses are on them.
Mary, I think that's an excellent point. I think that one of the questions is that when this goes out and individuals have a chance to review it, that you send back what additional information do you need and the clarifications on the unsure. And I think that because, as you said, there's very much, some people are unsure because they can't decide whether it rises to meet the criteria, and others, it may be a point of information. What else do people need at this point between now and the next meeting? I was going to propose that individuals review and ask what additional information is needed or what else they need as we would continue the deliberations. I was also going to ask this, I'm jumping ahead, to have you discuss in pairs both the results and looking ahead to the other bucket about, recommendations going forward and possible names. But before we get to that, I'd like to just, what is it that people need right now? Mary's indicated she wants more information. What else do you need at this point?
It's Lynn. Okay. I guess, some of these things I'm looking at the slave owners. We have streets, as Mike was pointing out, you don't know his name for an individual or the family, but, we have Alexander Street. We have, I guess, a few others that were named after early settlers of Mecklenburg County, and even though they owned slaves, I kind of look on that as these are like sort of the founding families, and they came in, and their slaves were they were also original, settlers of the county. And I say, well, maybe those aren't names we need to change unless there was something about them, like, were they a particularly cruel slave owner? I don't know how we find all that kind of information, but I throw that out as something that before I, would say we should either change or not change the name. I'd like to have that kind of information if possible, but I don't really know if that's even possible to find. I'll put this in writing when I get my list.
Yeah, Fanny?
I have some general questions, and I don't know whether I don't want to make more work for anyone, but I'm just curious about whether most of the streets are named in this area for people or for locations. It could be some street is on a hill, it's named hill. I don't know what percentage. I mean, I don't know whether we can find out. How were streets named? Are they are the Confederate generals predominant names for any military figures here? Are there other names for military figures? Or, I mean, was that just kind of an outlier for military people who streets are named after? I'm just curious about how these names came to be and what percentage of them are about just local people who are important to a particular area or street, or whether most of them are for people who may not even live here or who never lived here, who are just names that were just picked because, they were important for the country. I'm just curious about how these streets got their names. I don't know whether that's a possibility of finding out any of that information. But I just think, maybe in the context of when we tell the story about why we decided to, recommend these particular names for changing, there might be some context about how much of an outlier those names really are.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanny. B, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to maybe put a little context on what Lynn had asked about founding fathers as such. And we're going to face that. Every name that we say needs to have a change, someone's going to have a reason not to change it. And I understand that. Understanding more about, I've heard so much in my past and growing up and talking about Cameron and the good roads governor. And then I find here the reason you have good roads is because you use black men to build those roads, but no mention was made of those whose bodies were enslaved to name those roads. So I'm quite sure founding fathers from Mecklenburg County and for every county did good things, but there are also things that they did they shouldn't have been doing. And I know in the context of time of when these things happened, it wasn't seen that way. But that's the very reason why we're sitting here now and talking about a commission and considering what name. So, yeah, I look at Barrington Drive. I grew up on the street. My family's home is there, has been there for over 50 years. So I wanted more information on that one. And yes, more information, as Fanny has said, to help us put this in context for people when we put this list out there and say, these are the names we're recommending, we need to let them know, as opposed to just the name and they don't have a context in which we considered this name and why this one is on the list in the first place. So, we're going to face opposition for every name on this list for it to be changed, whether it's the descendants of that individual or a business owner who says, my business has been here for 75 years and I don't think I should change my street name. We need to help them understand why this is being changed. And for me, the understanding helps it and makes me say, well, I have lived on you for years and years, but it may be time to name you something else. Maybe your name ought to be Reginald Hawkins Drive or something. But we need to put that in context. And that's what I'm thinking about, because somebody is going to say, oh, you can't change that name. That's always been a part of Charlotte. That's a founding father of Charlotte. That's the founding father of Mecklenburg County. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at it now in the true context in which this name was decided upon. So I just wanted to put that in there because, we're going to face opposition. You're going to say, people, you're being disrespectful to Charlotte Mecklenburg history. No, we're not being disrespectful. What we're trying to do is be inclusive of what this town and its history should be about. And that's it.
Thank you, B.
Yep.
To the historians, how easy, well, Tom, I believe you had said on the Confederate leaders that you had found some minutes so that those we do have documentation for, that Stonewall was for Stonewall Jackson. Is that correct?
Thank you for asking. Let me kind of ramble for a minute. The first thing to Fanny's wish that we knew why particular streets got named, that turns out to be nearly impossible to find out. You have to, I assumed that when Jefferson Davis, I went and looked just recently, why did they name Jefferson Davis Street Jefferson Davis Street? So I looked in the Charlotte Observer, Charlotte News Index, and it doesn't get mentioned. And so it's not something that people publicly talked about, which makes our job much tougher. So that's one thought. A second thought is with the Stonewall and Hill and what was the other street there?
Was it Bragg?
Came as with painstaking research, which I didn't do, read about it in the newspaper, but over a period of many months, there was a proposal to rename Stonewall, and some folks pushed back and said it's not named after the general, there was just a stone wall there. Other people pushed back and said, why are we renaming a thing about a great American, that's their point. But the way they determined that those streets probably, almost certainly, but not conclusively, were named after Confederate generals is that a county clerk was looking through the handwritten notes of council meetings and found one in which they named 4 streets after 4 Confederate generals. It doesn't say why they do it. It doesn't say that they named them after Confederate generals, but the fact that those 4 streets were all named at once after the Civil War is the best evidence we've got. I wish it was easy to track this down, and we're going to get pushed to track it down because people are going to push back on all of them. And so it's going to take that level of research before we get anything that's close to definitive.
And to add to that, in terms of the family names, like Ray Road, the Moorhead Street, it also is possible that a lot of these streets names were given the names because people owned land, prominent land in the area. And so they would have the roads that were laid out in that region named after the families who owned the land there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for my own clarification, my understanding from what you said last time, that the documentation for the white supremacists like Cameron Morrison, that's very straightforward. That most of the names that we have on that list that are dealing with the legacy of Jim Crow, that information is available, and that the case can be made fairly easily for how they connect to the white supremacy campaign. Is that was my understanding for that group of names.
For the later names, those named for people who were active around the turn of the 20th century, like Morrison and Aycock and so forth. Those, it's easy to identify them and know that the streets are named after those people for what they did during that era. But as I said, as I continue to go back and look for information around Clarkson, I found that street had existed at least since as early as the 1880s, 1881. And Harriet, who was known for being a prominent member of the white supremacy efforts in Charlotte, he would not have been old enough to have gotten a street named after him. So what I've been able to determine in going back is that there were articles talking about his ancestors, his father and uncle, who were also prominent people who moved to the Charlotte region after the Civil War, but they came from a large slaveholding family in South Carolina. His uncle, as I said, tried to reestablish the Charlotte Military Academy, and given the view of the Civil War and people who fought in the Confederacy, he would have been someone who would have been revered, particularly for trying to reestablish a prominent institution like the North Carolina Military Academy. Now, his father, William Clarkson, Tom pointed out in our discussions that the railroads where Clarkson Street runs along the railroads, and his father became a prominent railroad man and likely owned some land in that area. But being able to confirm that is going to be hard because it's not something that they talked about in the newspapers. That we're deciding to change the name of the street or adding a name to the street because we are honoring such and such and so and so.
Right.
The what you can glean from this is that in the newspaper articles, whenever prominent people die, there are usually large write-ups, and you can gain some kind of understanding of how they are viewed to the larger public in Charlotte. And so that's what I have been able to go off of. In terms of the slaveholders and what kind of slaveholders they have been, it's just a matter of finding as many documents as you can and determining whether they provide any insight beyond the number of slaves that they own. And again, it's just digging up those documents. And I've tried to add as much as I could in the original list. I could make a second swing by, or loop back around and look at some of these slaveholders and see if there are any more documents that I could, learn about what kind of slaveholders they were. But in my original past, I didn't find any information like that. But I'm willing to go back and look and see if there's any more information.
Okay. Do you think by the next meeting you will be able to?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Emily, can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Before we make our recommendations, we're going to have the public input, right?
Right.
So there may be people at these public meetings who come to us with other names or with more information about the name we have on our list. And so then those things would then need to be investigated, I'm assuming, the contentions of the public people who might offer up other things. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is all preliminary to that process.
It is, but it is, at least it's been my thinking that we would not submit for public comment the entire list that Willie presented that Dr. Griffin presented to us. That we would be presenting those names that we, according to our criteria, are recommending for change. That we are tasked with coming up with a draft proposal. And so that's why there is a need for this group to have some consensus about the names that we would be putting out for public comment. We can make we can frame that about that we believe the need for documentation and that these have that documentation to meet the criteria. But I don't think it's totally open-ended. The city council and the mayor have asked us to have this wrapped up by December. So it is not a totally open, it may not be a perfect process or a perfect recommendation, but it has to be, in my mind, a well thought out recommendation based upon criteria. And I mean, we give it our best shot with a strong case, but it's not that we have years to research every street name. Does that?
Well,
but if names come up, we would review them. I mean, if something surfaced that we had totally missed, we would, before the meeting on December the 2nd, have Dr. Griffin look at it and research it, and then give us that feedback on December 2nd, before December 2nd. Does that make sense? But I mean, this is not a totally open-ended, process that will go on indefinitely.
But Emily, isn't it true if we adopt this set of criteria, which the city council endorses, that if citizens in the future petition because they've identified a street name or something else, that this is a criteria that the city council can leverage with the professional staff to figure out what to do?
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, we haven't, next time we'll be discussing what framework do we want to recommend to the city going forward and proactively, and what kind of names, if we recommend changes, what kind of framework do we recommend that they use? Absolutely. Alan, that is absolutely true.
I think it's important also, and I think a lot of our discussion is getting around maybe numbers and not missing any, which is not our charge. I think that, and I'm just saying that if we only found 2 or 3 of these to make the recommendations, I think it's really making a statement. And that's the important part. But if we miss some, or there's some that could be discovered later on, that's someone else's charge. But I think that whatever we put forward, it's got to be crisp, guys. We've got to be able to not only say this is the criteria, but this is the evidence that supports it. Because the last thing I would want is to have this become more of a political uproar that would divide us even more. I look at this as an opportunity to bring us together and discover a little bit about our past and move forward. So I think that this, words like in some of the documents, street likely was named after. Guys, if I've written a thesis paper, that wouldn't even make it to page 1. So we've got to make sure what we're bringing forward is defendable.
Other comments? What we will do, I'm sorry, I couldn't see who was going to say something. Did someone have a...
Elliot, this is Lena James.
Sure.
I was just going to comment to make sure I'm understanding kind of the path we're proceeding in and what the content of that might be. So as I understand it, the commission members would craft a proposal which includes some reduced list of names from what was originally presented and considered. That's the proposal that would be out there for public comment and consideration, after which perhaps some modified version of that list, depending on the feedback, will be presented for council to weigh in on and take some action. And then down the road, that would be the analysis and the methodology, I guess, based on which the city would rely to say, here's the study we did, and based on this, these are the lists that we identified, the names that require some further consideration or change. I just want to make sure, as we think through and address potentially what it is the city may have to defend down the road, I want to make sure I understand.
My understanding from my understanding, that is part A of it. Part A of it was we were to establish criteria and determine specific street names that we believe should be changed that do not reflect current values, and so that's what we were talking about today. We are also supposed to come up with looking proactively, not only not doing these, but how should we address street naming going forward? And next time we were going to talk about criteria or a framework And people did that in their pairs, but we didn't have time to review that today, about what kind of framework do we recommend to the city to use going forward, and that we would include some names by way of illustration. It would not be exhaustive by any means, but here are other people that perhaps should be considered for street names. That those were the twin tasks that we were charged with.
Twin tasks be out for public comment. I guess that's part of the clarification I need.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, both pieces of it. And so then I think we want to just be poised to receive whatever that comment is.
Absolutely.
And based on consensus, we may or may not incorporate it. The commission may or may not incorporate portions of it before it finally takes it to council.
Yes.
So I think the more inclusive and open we can be about that process, the easier it is to defend.
Absolutely. In typical fashion, in typical fashion, we would have had public comment before we even undertook this. I mean, to me, in many ways, this is sort of a backwards process. In most instances of of these kind of citizen commissions, we would have already received community feedback. But because of the pandemic, it was decided that we needed to have some deliberations and then put out proposals to the public rather than first capturing community feedback. So absolutely, we are totally open to the community's comment.
And I think one more thing to add is we have an opportunity to make some definitive statements about how we came to this work, about the history and the things that we've learned from Dr. Griffin and Dr. Cox, so that we can give a little context about trying to right wrongs or trying to do some restorative justice, if you will, through this process. So I think we have an education piece I think we spoke about as well, about educating about the history that may not be as well known for some of our residents. We have kind of that piece and the ability, I believe, Mary, you put in the comments about changing, policy about moving forward, about naming streets after certain persons. I think we have that in our purview as well, in those recommendations that we provide.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think that whatever we put out for public comment should have a preamble that reflects the history we have learned from.
I agree, yeah. And I think that'll be really important. I think someone mentioned the term curriculum, kind of really resetting something where the city can tell a different story. So that will help kind of navigate the public input process as well.
I mean, it's about crafting a more inclusive narrative.
Right. Which requires an education piece, right? So everyone here has been kind of brought up to this, has gotten a good, great overview, but recognizing that everyone that's responding may not obviously didn't have that privilege. So we have to do a little bit of catch up for our residents to make sure they understand the impacts of the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Griffin and Dr. Cox, I would think if you could, I think as we begin to move, since it's already in October, if you could begin to craft a summary preamble that could help frame the recommendations. I mean, I think that we will need that by the end of the month once we have our actual recommendations. So what we are going to do is Tiffany is going to compile the results, and we will send it out with a list of questions asking for your feedback, and also a sense of some questions that we would like you to consider in pairs before the next meeting. And at the next meeting, we will revisit this list and hear from Dr. Griffin if there's additional information about any of these, and take another poll, and then we will finalize it at the last meeting in the month before the public comment phase and that will be on October 28th. You will also have some assignment to be thinking about the proactive piece, the framework that we would recommend to the city going forward. So Tiffany, is there anything else before you're going to give us some sense about the media relations question, or does anyone have any questions? Tiffany, I can't hear you.
Apologies. And Lena can probably speak to this a little bit more eloquently than I can. So if there are media requests about things like that, or public records requests about the documents, we have a team within the city that handles those requests, gets those responses together. Because if we share it with one, we share it with all. We don't, that's just our practice as a city. And if there's an actual request for documents, we have a process that goes through that, and we have to document it and that sort of thing. So if there's questions about reporters or requests or any information like that, feel free to reach out to me so I can make sure that we get the response coordinated through our city's communications team and legal team if needed. I don't know if I said that correctly. I think I did.
You did. Most of the records, I'll just bolster that by adding, obviously, to the extent you're conducting public business and doing it under the purview of this commission, the records are likely subject to disclosure as being public records. So as I always tell our clients and staff here at the city, be careful what you put into writing and what you transmit, because it will likely be subject to disclosure in any format and regardless of what device it's on, to the extent it is related to this public business, whether it's your personal device or not, whether you use a public or a personal or professional email or not, etc., including social media.
Thank you, Lena. We have additional time, but I think that it would be more useful to receive the information and have time to reflect, unless someone has a real need to continue the conversation now, or if there's something in general you want to tell Tiffany and me that you need before the next meeting.
Emily, I saw some questions in the chat about trying to understand how street names are allotted or assigned. So Tiffany, that may be something that offline you and I can follow up on and share, maybe from a very high level perspective for purposes of the next meeting, at least how that process works. And then to the extent there are recommendations about how to do it going forward as developers and builders go through the planning, land development review process, that may be an opportunity where developments like the River District and so on can consider some new criteria that council possibly adopts.
Sure.
But we can understand the process first in order to make some informed recommendations going forward.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Anyone else? Well, thank you. This is challenging. It's not easy. If it were easy, people have done a long time ago. And, we really need, I think, at this point to pause, reflect, think about the criteria, and think about, what it is we want for the community and how this work aligns within the broader reckoning of building and creating a more inclusive community for everyone, and that the symbols do matter, and how do the symbols reflect our values and who belongs and what we think is important. And I just ask us to think about that as we consider these names, and think about, at a very practical level, how we create recommendations that will win public support broadly. And that's not, I think that there's equal chance to be criticized on, but, from multiple perspectives. So that's not in one way or the other. There are those who are saying, oh, this is Charlotte's history. How can you change these names? And then there are other people, how could you not change more names because they don't reflect who we are? So I think there's a lot of possibilities for criticism. That's why I think it's very important that we have a very well thought out case for the recommendations that we do make, and that we're all comfortable making that case. So thank you. And we will be back in touch shortly, if not today, certainly tomorrow, with information and assignments. So thank you. Appreciate your time and input.
Thank you.
Mhm.